Okay, so it is mini set time for Festival of Legends, and let's look at the cards. There are 38 total cards, but each of the classes actually has more cards than you might expect because there are so many dual class cards. We're just going to go over things in the order that I downloaded them from the Hearthstone card library, as far as the file names are concerned. So we're going to start with whatever this is. Fiddlefire Imp. There's a 3-cost 3/2 demon that is a mage and warlock card, with Battlecry add a random fire mage and fire warlock card to your hand. This is, an interesting card because it's, just giving you 2 additional cards alongside a 3/2 body for 3, which, is not incredible. Obviously, the body itself is not great, but like basically getting a body with draw 2 and them specifically being, fire spells, and you have a at least reasonable understanding of what that might be, is pretty powerful. It's not as good in a lot of contexts as draw 2 would be, but in obviously fatigue situations, it's going to be more powerful than that, and gives you access to a lot of stuff from outside the game if you happen to be playing like a Ramath deck or something like that. So overall, I think this is a very solid card. I don't know if it necessarily fits in any of the sort of top metagame style decks right now, but certainly has applications in a lot of other quirky stuff like Ramath, which of course I love. Next, we have the Remixed Tuning Fork. Now I have to figure out exactly what all of the versions of Remixed Tuning Fork does, or rather do. It's a 2-cost warrior weapon. And let's pull up what the versions are. There is Sharpened Tuning Fork, which is Battlecry, get +2 attack, giving you a 4/2 weapon for 2. There's the Reinforced Tuning Fork, which is Battlecry, gain 5 armor. The Curved Tuning Fork, which basically gives you a cleave effect. You attack and deal damage to minions next to whatever it is you're attacking. And then Backup Tuning Fork, which discovers a taunt minion with a Battlecry. This, I think, is just a generally like pretty solid weapon. Warrior currently has the Woodcutter's Axe, which it's funny because like Woodcutter's Axe in its time was actually a pretty good card, even though it only affected rush minions. That has kind of been eclipsed by the sort of power creep of a lot of those sort of things in the game these days. And if you compare it to like Disco Maul, it's actually hilarious because Woodcutter's Axe is, Death Rattle give +2/+1 to a random minion of yours, and Disco Maul just keeps scaling, can be like +8/+8 or whatever. But Tuning Fork, I think obviously the better than War Axe that you get 25% of the time is kind of nice. And all the other versions at least have applications. One of the awkward things with the Remixed Tuning Force in particular is that this is the sort of card that you're going to often want to play on turn 2, just for tempo. And having, a options that like aren't very good that you might hit then can be a little bit awkward. Like if you hit the cleave thing in control matchup, I guess maybe you can just hold it and try and get the battle cry for a discover against control decks. I think it gives you a lot of interesting options for longer games, as well as giving you a at least reasonable weapon to be able to clear stuff early on. But overall, I think it's neat, but not really doesn't really stand out to me as an amazing card. This one though, the Abyssal Bassist. I think this card is extremely good. This is a 7-cost 4/7 taunt lifesteal, but it basically never costs 7 because it costs 2 less for each weapon you've equipped this game. Obviously, you don't necessarily want to play tons of weapons just to get this going, but this is a weapon you've equipped, not weapon you've played. So it does trigger off of Sword Eater, and I've played a lot of Menagerie and like taunt style warrior decks. Warrior's been the class I played the most this expansion, which you can probably tell if you've been watching my YouTube videos. And this being a demon, so it is an additional type for Menagerie decks. It also means that if you are playing a Menagerie deck and you amalgam this, you are incredibly likely to hit a one amalgam band because there are not other demons in Warrior besides this. But overall, I think this is a very, very solid card. The survivability from the life steal is very valuable. If you're playing like a black rock and roll, like last stand style deck, if you can get this in the way against an aggressive deck, both buys you time and is the sort of thing that if you do massively buff with Blackrock, Lorthamar, or Last Stand, can really, really, really serve to keep you alive very well. So I think this is a very, very solid card, and I'm going to be playing it a lot at least. Next up, we have Elite Tauren Champion. My favorite part about this card is that people can ask what's in ETC, and I can just say a bomb because this is another ETC. Also, it's funny that you can actually have an ETC that only has cards named ETC in it. You know, you can have the ETC band manager and put original ETC, and then ETC God of Metal, and then this in your ETC. So you just, you know, yo dog, I heard you like ETCs, so got ETC in your ETC. But yeah, I think this is again an interesting card. This is like I think a reasonable like anti-control type card, right? Because you know a lot of decks that are looking to like you know conserve their resources and like you know be able to play things out when they want to have more situational cards. This can be a powerful effect to disrupt their intended game plan. And there is the awkwardness that you know if you are playing a proactive deck that kind of runs out of stuff to do, that it can just blow you up if you play it yourself and you know you're playing against a control deck that just happens to have like everything they want. You do need to make sure that you have the way you know ways to spend your excess mana, or else this could just get you exploded. So yeah, I think it's a very cool card, and I don't know that it's necessarily going to see a ton of play. Because one of the funny things about this is it basically tells you to play Hearthstone the way you should probably be playing Hearthstone anyway, which is spending all your mana every turn. I think that generally speaking, a lot of people kind of get too fancy, and the reality is you should mostly be playing Hearthstone as if you were always in a rock duel anyway. Next, we have Speaker Stomper. So this is the new Lotheb. I really like this card. 4 cost 4/4 tradable enemy spells cost 2 more next turn. Basically a double Cult Neophyte, but with tradable. Gives you the ability to have like meaningful disruption. I really, really like tradable cards that are essentially like textile cards, because obviously having a card like a Acidic Swamp Ooze or you know this or a Demolition Specialist, those or Renovator, whatever it's called, sort of stuck in your hand against an opponent where it doesn't do anything. That's really rough, right? And given that Hearthstone, you know, doesn't have like sideboards like a game like Magic the Gathering does, it can make those cards difficult to play. And giving those cards tradable makes it so that those cards have, you know, more potential applications because, hey, you can put it into your deck and it doesn't have to be like an incredibly skewed metagame where every single deck is like a spell-based combo deck. But there's a few of them that you like to have the tools to be able to deal with. So between tradable and the EDC Band Manager, there's a lot of ways to get like modality and options in a lot of matchups, and I really, really enjoy that. So I think this is a great card, and I do expect it to see pretty significant play. Next up, we have Dead Air. First of all, hilarious name for, you know, what it is doing. It is destroy your undead, resummon them. This is the third, I think, multi-rune card that we have seen for Death Knight. It is not available to... Ooh, we're getting some dead visuals to go with our Dead Air here, as we're not able to focus. The music is just clearly too powerful. And look at my calluses. Let's go. How about here? Okay, focus on my face. There we go. Hey, victory. Ta-da! We're doing it live. But, so, Dead Air. Destroy undead, resummon them. It is specifically Frost Unholy, so you can't play it in, like, say, a triple Unholy deck. But it is, I think, a very interesting card for Death Rattle-centric decks. Obviously, it can also generate a bunch of corpses if you happen to have, you know, a large number of things in play. I really like this with stuff like Infectious Ghoul, where, you know, you get, like, your trigger for your Death Rattles, and, you know, also, hey, he's back. So I think this is actually a very, very interesting card that I want to experiment with. I think this in, like, something like a Death Rattle-focused, say, Climactic Necrotic Explosion deck, which maybe doesn't necessarily need the Climactic Necrotic Explosion, but I also really like the sort of multi-rune cards, generally speaking, because I think that at this point, you generally only see triple rune decks in Death Knight because the triple rune cards are so powerful. So I like seeing things that give people incentives to play decks outside of that, because I think it makes the deck building a lot more interesting. Next up, we have Popular Pixie. 2 costs 2, 3. Choose one, refresh your hero power, or the next one costs 1. Or rather, 0. Not 1. 0. So this lets you, like, basically lock and load a hero power in, like, a hero power-oriented druid deck. This one feels kind of meh to me. I don't think, obviously, there's the hero power, cards for druid, but most of those, at least to this point, have typically been used to support like a longer game controlling strategy. And those decks, A, have much less use for like a 2 cost 2 3, and B, like don't necessarily need this sort of effect when they're playing a longer game. That said, the fact that like the Anubricon nerf happened does mean that this is potentially a way that you can like lock in additional ability to get armor for 0 mana on the turn that you want to fire off your Anubricon, which is interesting, but like a lot of these more sort of like combo oriented decks like that don't have that much space in their decks. And also, like, you can already do the latter portion with Tour Guide, right? Obviously, yes, you could potentially have like this and a Tour Guide and get like, double up on your hero power on like 10 mana or whatever. And that's interesting, but this doesn't really stand out to me as a card that is likely to really A, fit into the decks currently exist, or B, have enough support for a new deck that's super focused on hero powers to want to use it. All right, next up, Cool Ghoul. This is the Battlegrounds card. Divine Shield Reborn, 4 cost, 3/1 undead. This is interesting. Like, we haven't really seen Divine Shield cards in Death Knight before, so this like dual class thing with Paladin, I think, is kind of sweet. I don't know how good this is likely to be. Obviously, it takes 4 sources of damage to kill it for 1, right? Which is tough to remove. It's very, very difficult to remove. How good that is, I don't know. It is still like a 3/1. But like maybe this is actually just a powerful Paladin card for Paladin like buff deck, right? Where you're interested in making sure that you have a thing alive to target with your Seal of Bloods or Garden's Grace or for Quel'Thalas and things like that. This is just very, very difficult for your opponent to kill unless they're playing like a swarm deck and throw 4 things into it. Obviously, it's very vulnerable to any kind of silence effect. Silence effects are not very common outside of Priest currently, and there is obviously the new Priest Rogue dual class combo silence effect, which wipes this guy off the planet. But I do think that like if you're playing a deck that's looking for like a durable threat, this is a very good one for that. Next up, we have Blood Treant. 5 cost 2/2, costs health instead of mana. Dual class Warlock Druid. When I saw this card, the first thing I thought was like evolve type effects. Obviously there are no direct evolve effects in Druid or in Warlock. However, there is like Abyssal Summoner, the 3 cost 3/3, who you sacrifice a creature and get a creature that has 1 higher cost. So you could use this to play a turn 3 6-drop with that combination of cards. That might not be any good, but you can do that. There's also the Void Virtuoso, which makes you immune on your turn, so you can play this for free. Obviously, it's just a 2/2, so that's not really like a huge, tempo boost or whatever. So I feel like given that, you probably want to ensure that you're actually having more sort of synergistic stuff. I'm being told by my chat right now that it doesn't work with Virtuoso. I guess the way that they changed that, it won't work. It used to be that like immune effects, you could just pay health and you wouldn't take any damage, but I think maybe the recent change to that actually removes that interaction. So scratch what I said about Void Virtuoso. That doesn't work, and if you thought it did, you're a fool. But yeah, overall, feels pretty mediocre. Spending this much health, like 5 is a lot of health too, right? Like if this were 3, maybe, I don't know, like maybe that becomes something that's like actually quite attractive for a lot of decks. just as an aggressive tempo tool. That might be just too good there, but just sort of throwing that out. 5's just a lot for a 2/2. Unless you have additional synergies, as mentioned. But moving on. Remixed Totem Carver, another card that I have to go find what the remixed versions are on the Blizzard webpage. So we're doing that right now. Dun, 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 dun. Clicking, and somehow I got clicked off Festival of Legends. Let's scroll down. Where are we at? So, Remixed Totem Carver. Remember, what is it? Something totemic? Tuskar Totemic, that's what it is. This is now a Tuskar Totemic. So but this is not a Tuskar Totemic that gives you a random totem when you play it. It, every single turn, turns into something which either summons a stereo totem, which, if you didn't know, is the totem that gives a random minion in your hand +2/+2 at the end of your turn. A Mana Tide, draw a card at the end of the turn. A Flame Tongue, or a Jukebox Totem, which is the new one that makes 1/1s, makes Silverhand recruits. So I think this is, it's an interesting card. Obviously, it is. Each of those totems is individually like reasonably powerful, but like how good is any of those that you want to pay like, A, only have a like the possibility of getting them randomly, and B, get a 3/2 alongside it. Doesn't really seem that attractive to me. I do think that like if you're just like playing like an old school mid-range value game, that maybe this was a reasonable card, but I feel like this sort of effect is unlikely to be that attractive given the power level of a lot of things these days. And speaking of the Jukebox Totem, one of the things that the Remixed Totem Carver can make, a 0/4, it's a mech totem. I actually didn't even notice that part before. That at the end of your turn, you summon a 1/1 Silverhand Recruit. I think this is more likely to be appealing to Paladin than it is to Shaman. I feel like in like Totem Shaman, for instance, this is a 4 health totem for 2, but like it doesn't really synergize super well with the rest of your deck. Most of your things care about like, making additional totems. It is obviously very good with both Anchored Totem, Flame Tongue Totem, and Bloodlust. So maybe there's enough there that just, getting additional bodies in the board is valuable. So having a reasonably durable totem like this that does continue to provide more stuff for your board could be good. But doesn't really jump out to me as something that is super exciting for at least existing versions of Totem Shaman. I could see in a Paladin deck that is focused on Silverhand recruits, maybe this is okay. Compare it though to the Caravan, right? There's the 1/3 Caravan that each turn made 2 Silverhand recruits at the beginning of your turn. Obviously, that's pretty different because that has to survive the turn. This is guaranteed to give you one every single turn. I actually thought Caravan was an underrated card that was pretty effective in those decks, and this could be, a card that if you are playing again like a specifically Silverhand recruit focused Paladin deck, could eventually be appealing. I don't know that it's good enough right now because I don't know if there's enough other Silverhand recruit cards. Though I was playing a Silverhand recruit Paladin deck in part of the last metagame and had a decent amount of success with it, so maybe it's there. Maybe that's a good card for it. Next up, we have a hilarious card, Thanotum, Lord of the Opera. A 30 cost, 15/15 taunt lifesteal. Cost equal to the amount of cards in your deck. So this is a very cool card. I really like the low deck, empty deck Warlock type cards. This obviously synergizes extremely well with like Jailer, for instance. You can just Jailer into boop this guy, and that's cool. Obviously, any version of that is extremely vulnerable to mass removal. This doesn't have any sort of resilience to that. Doesn't give you any additional way to like restock your deck. I assume this is not a demon because otherwise you could play the things that summon random demons and get this guy into play, and that would be outrageous because it's a 15/15 taunt lifesteal, and could just end games on the spot. But yeah, I think this guy's sweet, and I want to experiment with him. I don't think this is like a good enough effect to justify like building a deck that's explicitly trying to run itself out of cards. Simply because, again, like any kind of controlling deck was generally going to have an answer to this sort of thing. And it's obviously very slow against aggressive decks. but I think it's cool enough that it is worth experimenting with. But it's just cool, I think, and probably not very good. Next up, we have Remixed Rhapsody, which is, once again, another card that I have to go searching for the various versions of, just making my life more difficult. This is a Demon Hunter card. So it deals 3 damage to all minions and gains an extra effect in your hand that changes each turn, which are draw 3 cards, obviously a pretty good one. Deal 3 damage twice, so effectively deal 6 damage to all minions. Give your hero +5 attack this turn. Summon a 5/5 demon, and yeah, those are the 4 options. So I think this is, all of those are kind of powerful, right? Obviously, drawing cards is powerful. Making a 5/5 when you're clearing your opponent's board is powerful. Unlike a lot of, unlike some of the remix cards, I feel like the AoE effect is something that you kind of need to be what you need it to be when you need to play it, right? And 3 damage to all minions is not that much damage. Like most decks that are playing any kind of aggressive strategy are going to be bigger than that on turn 5. We even didn't really see like Chaos Nova, for instance. Chaos Nova at 4 damage at 5 doesn't really see any play, right? So having an unreliable clear that does less damage, yes, it has a bonus effect, but are you relying on that bonus effect with your AoE? It just feels a little bit awkward, and especially when they have access to the Spell Power Unleash Fel combination, this seems that much less appealing. Your bonus effect always being Reno myself seems a lot better to me. So this feels like something that doesn't really have a home, and frankly, it's difficult for it to find a home simply because of the combination of, hey, you board clear and varied effect, you probably are just going to have to play it when you have to play it, or else you're going to die. All right, next we have Jam Session, a 2-cost Shaman and Warrior card. Give a friendly minion +3/+3, deal 1 damage to all other minions, overload 1, and it is a fire spell. This card is awesome. I've wanted just like more fire spells for any kind of Enraged Warrior deck, more whirlwind effects for Enraged Warrior deck that are actively good, and also buffs for Enraged Warrior deck. This is just so good. Like this might be like just the best card in the set. We're getting out of focus here, but the focus is on Jam Session right now and how powerful it is. But yeah, I think this card is arguably the best card in the set. Enraged Warrior is already a good deck right now, and this is an extremely powerful upgrade for that deck. I think you can potentially play like a more like fire focused, more like you could even look at like not playing the sort of riff type stuff and playing like frothing Berserker with this, right? Like this is by itself, I just think so powerful and fits into your desires for the Enraged deck so well. I just think it's so good. I don't know if this goes into any sort of Shaman deck, but wow, is this exciting for Warrior. All right, next up, Funnel Cake. It's a Priest Druid card. Restore 3 health to a minion and its neighbors. For each one overhealed, refresh a mana crystal. This is a kind of a wild card. I have wanted to try to be able to find ways to make more proactive overheal priest type decks work. And there's a number of pretty powerful support cards in this set for them, including this one. Funnel Cake on like a Crimson Clergy and a things that are already getting bonuses from potentially being overhealed and then potentially be able to chain off those sort of things feels pretty powerful. So being able to exceed both having more ways to multi-heal your guys feels valuable in itself, as well as having ways to sort of cheat mana. This is, I think, this and the sort of priest elemental, which we'll get to shortly. I think both contribute to there being potentially a like proactive overheal priest strategy that has legitimate legs. Next up, we have Remixed Musician, another one that I have to go to the website for. So, Remixed Musician, 3/3 rush, random ability. Not random, changes each turn. The abilities are Divine Shield, Wind Fury, Lifesteal, and Poisonous. I don't know that you want, any of those abilities are like good enough to want to play just a 3/3 rush for 3. Obviously a 3/3 like Poisonous Rush can be pretty powerful as like, hey, this kills any big thing and could also just be an early game minion. Wind Fury can potentially kill 2 small things. Lifesteal is good against aggressive decks. I feel like this is, unless you specifically have like a deck that like with the new Book of Specters minion, the Magatha or whatever, that really wants to play like a completely minion full deck. Maybe this is good in that because you really specifically need to have access to more like immediate removal, and you're not necessarily playing a class that has like rush minions. Otherwise, I don't really expect this to see much play, but I do think that the effects are at least reasonable to the point that you might find a home. All right, next, Ambient Light Spawn. This card I actually think is very powerful. 4-cost, 3/4 Elemental Finale and Overheal. Give another random friendly minion +2/+2. So I was talking about this with Funnel Cakes. This is, just a very snowbally effect, right? If you have like a board of guys, you can play this. It immediately, if you finale it, it will immediately +2/+2 something. If it's not killed, and you have like, Funnel Cakes or whatever other things to heal it, you just, boop, 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 grow your board and blast them into oblivion. So this and Hadronis are cards that actually give a proactive Overheal Priest type strategy a way to close out the game, which, given that it previously only really had Hadronis, I think put you in a position where you didn't really have enough tools to win before any kind of controlling deck would take over. This, I think, gives you the like, hey, I actually have a threat that can legitimately close the game. And I'm not just sort of sitting here doing things that are not that powerful while you overwhelm me with card advantage and removal. Next up, we have Star Power. 5-cost arcane spell. This is a mage hunter spell, so both pretty heavily in arcane. Deal 5 damage to a random enemy minion. Repeat this with 1 less damage. Obviously pretty powerful at clearing boards. Against, a board full of small minions, being able to do, ping, 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 ping can deal with a lot of stuff. Maybe you want to play this in like a, arcane hunter style deck. Maybe you want to play it in like a big hunter style deck. I feel like there's probably better stuff in mage. But hunter doesn't really have that much like good like AoE style stuff, and does have things that specifically want you to lean into arcane. I doubt you'll really see a lot of this, but I could certainly see people experimenting with it in the Arcane Hunter decks. Next up, Fanboy. This is another card that I think actually feels like it has the potential to be pretty strong in like a proactive Overheal Priest style deck. 2-cost, 2/2, give a friendly minion +2 attack and rush, or +2 health and life steal. Both these abilities are pretty good, and be able to choose between, hey, I'm behind on the board, need to kill your guy, and I want to bolster my guy so that it's harder for you to kill, and also give it lifesteal so it's hard for you to kill me. Just feels like a pretty strong card, and they're all attached to like an actual body as well. Be able to play like Crimson Clergy on turn 1, and then, okay, I'm going to make it so that you can't kill my Crimson Clergy, or I'm going to make it so my Crimson Clergy is a real threat, and I'm just going to keep healing it. Overall, I just think this is a solid card for a proactive Priest deck. I'm less excited about it in Druid, though, like an aggressive Druid deck. Currently, I feel like aggressive Druid mostly wants to be undead because of how good Wither is, and doesn't really feel like it has a home there. But could give, like a bottom feeder type strategy a little bit more legs. Next up, we have Doomkin. 6-cost, 3/4 Battlecry. Take one of your opponent's empty mana crystals. I mean, this is just like pretty cool. It's too cool for me to focus. Woo. Hello. Nope. Why does this keep failing to focus on me? What does it want to look at instead of me? There we go. But yeah, I think this is cool. I think that this is the sort of thing that is like, hey, I'm going to try and abuse you. I don't think it's very good. 6-cost to ramp yourself for 1 is obviously not particularly great. It can be like, like maybe this is the sort of card that you play in a like battle of decks that are looking to get certain points, whether it's combo decks or ramp decks, is a potential form of disruption. But overall, I don't think the card seems particularly strong, which is the sort of card that probably shouldn't be particularly strong, frankly. Next up is Rhythm Dancer Risa. 5 cost, 3/5 rush. After your hero attacks, return this to your hand and set its cost to 1. This is a neat card. You know, obviously it's like, hey, this gives you like board control in a deck that's looking to like keep punching your opponent in the face. Very powerful with Halvera or whatever. I don't know that this necessarily has like a home. Maybe this goes in like Outcast Demon Hunter just because it gives you, you know, a bunch of, you know, potential hits with Halvera. But yeah, overall, doesn't really seem amazing to me. Yeah, it is. It can like combo like stuff for Rogue because it is Deafen and Rogue, but it's hard for me. Yeah, maybe this is probably at its best in Rogue. Like it doesn't really seem like a particularly appealing Demon Hunter card, but it does seem like maybe this is a reasonable like Rogue board control tool because Rogue has less tools for that than Demon Hunter does, and does have access to, you know, obviously the hero power to effectively bounce it back and reuse it again. So the first time being 5 though is a lot to ask. Next up is Costumed Singer. 1 cost 2/1. At the end of your turn, draw a secret. This is a great card, right? For any kind of secret-based deck. If there is a secret-based deck in either of these classes, this is going to be a fantastic card in it. You know, it's a 1 cost that is always going to get you a card, and then very likely going to get you a second card against a lot of opponents. Super, super strong. As to whether the secrets themselves, the secret synergy and you know, decks around them are likely to be that good in either Mage or Hunter, that's sort of an open question. But this card is like the sort of thing that will absolutely, you know, be like the glue that carries that style of deck because it is real powerful. A lot of tempo, a lot of value. Next up is Tough Crowd. A 3 cost 2/1 with Outcast return minion to its owner's hand. This is both a Demon Hunter and Rogue card. That's where the Outcast and the Bounce come from. This seems less likely to be a card you're interested in really either. Well, I was gonna say less likely to be interested in Rogue because there's already stuff like Assassinate if you really wanted to just like kill stuff. In a certain metagame, like, you know, maybe I could see this seeing play, but it doesn't seem like, you know, a particularly appealing card in either sort of class. It's a neat design. Like I think it's pretty cool. But like it's situational in terms of your opponent having a thing that you really want to bounce, like you know, you need like a mid-range or large minion for this to feel any good. You know, like maybe this like in like Rogue because you can shadow step it and just keep Outcast bouncing their things for 1. But you know, otherwise I think feels pretty poor outside of a metagame where there's a lot of big things. Next we have Remixed Dispensobot, which is another card we need to go and find the versions of. But it's a 4 cost 4/4 mech. And what could it possibly do? It either gives Battlecry, get 2 random frost spells, or get 2 random mechs, or get 2 coins, or get 2 random mage secrets. All of those are pretty reasonable value, right? The question is really like, what deck actually wants this? It's a very good value card, but A, it's inconsistent because you don't necessarily get what you want when you want to play it. And B, Mage has a ton of powerful value cards already, right? Like Mage has Infinitize, Mage has Volume Up, Mage has, you know, just a lot of ways to generate additional resources. And I don't know that this is likely to, you know, be better than any of those. This could be another like, hey, maybe this goes into like a weird Ramath deck that just wants stuff from outside the game. But I do feel like it is difficult for this to find a home given, you know, that it competes with so many high quality cards in Mage already. All right, next up we have One Hit Wonder. I really love this combination of ability and name. It just one shot someone because it's a rush poisonous minion. Much like the bounce guy, this feels like Is this something that's going to really see constructed play? If there are, again, like big minions that you want to beat, this or the bounce thing could be good inclusions. But overall, I just don't see this being something that you're very likely to want to actually put into your deck because it doesn't really further your own strategy outside of, again, like specifically really wanting to kill big minions, and you'd have to have a weirdly skewed metagame for this to be something that I think you'd want to play. Next up is Plagiarizer. I love this card. I think this card is hilarious, both in terms of the name and the effect. I actually really wanted to have more Thief Steel cards because I feel like there's almost a deck there between like Mysterious Visitor and things like that. And this specifically giving you the top card of your opponent's deck is very interesting because it is both giving you something that is giving you information, right? Your opponent's drawing a particular card, and also ends up being more powerful with something like, what is it? It's not Harvester of Souls. Whatever that card is that steals your opponent, the card you have your opponent's copies of. Is it Harvester of Souls? It's Harvester of something. But anyway, I think it's like that your opponent's literally going to draw it right then. And it's like, okay, I can take the card that I know is going to be in their hand, or I know they're going to play. Harvester of Envy, not Harvester of Souls. Harvester of Envy, that's the name of the card. So that combination is like pretty interesting. And it's, reasonable stats. And, like it is, I think, just a very, very interesting card, with that combination of attributes that I certainly want to experiment with. Next up, Yelling Yodeler. Yodeler. 4-cost 3/4. This is Death Knight and Hunter. Trigger a friendly minion's death rattle twice. So this is a powerful effect on a lot of things, right? Like if you have like a death rattle that your opponent doesn't want you to trigger, there's no more like Burning Blade Acolyte, right? You can't defend the Demon Seed. But this is just overall, I think, just a very strong effect if you have any kind of like death rattle heavy deck. Very, very scary on some things. Like this on, say, like a Stoneborn General, right? Boom. This on like Cagehead. Boom. It has, one of the interesting things, by the way, about these dual class cards in Death Knight, none of them have runes, obviously, right? So you can play them in any version of Death Knight decks. Hunter currently doesn't have like amazing death rattles. There's just neutral ones like the Infectious Ghoul I was mentioning earlier. Does mean that like if this deck does like become popular, there are a lot of good silence options currently. So that is always a scare for playing a death rattle heavy deck, though. But I think this card is very powerful and could certainly be the impetus for playing a death rattle heavy deck. Next up is Grim Totem Buzzkill. 4-cost 5/4. Battlecry. Discard a weapon to draw 3 cards. This is interesting because obviously, any kind of deck that wants to play a significant number of weapons runs into the issue of, hey, it sucks to have extra weapons. This is a great way to cycle through extra weapons. This is an interesting card, not necessarily right now, but in the future, where like you could play like a combo oriented deck that is essentially using weapons in part to cycle through them with this. The fact that this does not have a minion type, I think, is one of the big hits against it. I think if this did have a minion type, this in like an amalgam or a menagerie style deck, to be able to like support your hook tusk or hook fists, and then be able to like I have this cheap weapon early, now I can get rid of it later. I think could be more appealing. Right now, I think it's more like, hey, if there's a deck that actually wants to play like a bunch of weapons, which I don't know there is, obviously, with the Abyssal Lifesteal Taunt guy. Maybe you want to play a deck that's more weapon heavy and then play this guy. But again, like that guy kind of wants to lean into playing in a menagerie shell or like a taunt shell or whatever. And this guy has none of those attributes. So it makes it like more difficult, I think, to justify playing a card like this. Next is Through Fell and Flames. 0 cost, give minion rush, finale, and +1/+1. I think this is a lot harder to use in Warrior than it is in Demon Hunter. This is a Warrior Demon Hunter card, in case you couldn't tell. Simply because Warrior's card draw is worse. I mean, we obviously did just see the, hey, discard draw. Maybe there's something like that, like a very weapon heavy deck that can like, rush particular things in. like I think this is the sort of thing that only really seems appealing if you have things that really have like attack triggers or whatever that you really want to get attacks right away to justify playing something like this. It is cool. Like zero cost is obviously like anything that costs zero is something you want to pay attention to. Rush is a pretty powerful effect, but you need to have the card draw to support it, and maybe there is. So we shall see. Next up, we have, speaking of Rush, Hollow Hound. 6 cost 3/6 Lifesteal Rush. Also damages minions next to whomever this attacks. This, I think, is a pretty appealing card in like a big Hunter style deck. I feel like Death Knight probably doesn't need more like Lifesteal, but Hunter certainly does. One of the issues that any kind of slower Hunter deck has always had is like, hey, I'm dying. Hey, I'm dying. Hey, I'm dying. My deck is full of things that do not stop me from dying. This is a good thing to stop you from dying. Using this with, anything that can like buff it. You can use this with like bananas. You can use this with the location. You can use it with lots of things to cleave off your opponent's board and get a ton of life back. So this card, I think, is definitely the sort of thing that can absolutely reinvigorate people's interest in like a big Hunter deck, because it is very impactful for keeping you alive against aggressive decks, which is frequently that style of deck's biggest weaknesses. Next, we have Backstage Bouncer, a 4-cost 4/5 taunt with Battlecry. Transform a friendly minion into a copy of this. So this is Taunt Hex, right? And the interesting thing in like, if say you're playing like a, like a, whether it's a taunt deck, like a proactive deck, like a menagerie style deck in Warrior, or you're playing like a totem type deck, like a mid-range shaman style deck. In either case, you have. You're pretty likely to have things like a mistake or like, a party animal or whatever just kind of laying around, or again, as shaman, a totem, to be able to just like generate an extra guy. Be able to like have like just a small minion that you played for tempo in the early turns, got a couple hits in, maybe value traded with, and then it becomes a 4/5 taunt. That's massive amount of tempo. So I feel like this card is actually pretty powerful. Basically giving you, obviously assuming a previous investment in something on the board, 2 4/5 taunts for 4 mana is a huge tempo swing against a lot of decks in the early game. Obviously, you do need to have played other stuff and had it survive. Maybe that you're looking at stuff like Foul Egg, right? Things that are difficult, or for your opponent to kill, or your opponent doesn't want to kill, so that you're actually able to get additional buffs on that. And you can buff this, right? You could potentially like imagine this in like Last Stand Warrior, right? You like last stand your Backstage Bouncer, and boom, you make 2 gigantic things. Probably less relevant in the early game tempo, but pretty fun to think about. Next, we have Cold Feet, a 2-cost frost spell for Paladin and Death Knight. Enemy minions cost 5 more next turn. This is a pretty scary card in a lot of decks where you just mostly have minions. Basically every deck that I ever play, I just want to play a bunch of minions. This obviously, it costs the person playing it mana. It costs, like the card. Neither Paladin nor Death Knight has like a tremendous amount of powerful card draw to make up for that fact. But I think this is a more appealing card than like the anti-spell one that we saw. I forget the name of it in Paladin, years ago. That was the exact same card for for spells, which is basically a low thab effect on just a spell. Minions are much more central to most decks' gameplay plan. So this can be a powerful disruptive tool against like a combo deck that is based around minions, like say an Anubricon deck. It can also be just a way to stop your opponent from being able to advance their board state, right? Obviously, there's ways around this with spell-based board progression or weapons or whatever else. But this does seem like the sort of thing that can be really obnoxious. I doubt it's going to be like meta-defining, meta-breaking or whatever, because again, you're not developing on your own if you're playing this in the early turns, and there are lots of spell-based or non-minion ways to advance your board state, especially with locations now. There's more diversity in terms of things you could spend your mana on. Next up, we have Hidden Meaning, a 2-cost secret. Obviously, it's a Hunter secret. When your opponent ends their turn with no mana, summon a random 3-cost minion. We were talking about the new 2/1. This is a powerful tempo tool to follow that up with. So, like if one of the key things about the secrets is finding secrets that actually are good against opponents in a variety of situations, then they're difficult for them to play around. This is basically a double cross, right? The double cross is whenever they spend all their mana. This is specifically when they end their turn with no mana. So one of the key things here is that they can't kill it before it actually gets to attack on their next turn, compared to other secrets that might generate minions. So this is a good, just like, hey, you gonna use your hero power in turn two? And if it's not that, well, they just wasted their, their hero power. So it's, I think, actually a pretty interesting secret in terms of both the dynamic that it creates for opponents wanting to play around it, as well as just being a reasonable way to generate threat early with a Hunter secret. Next up, Deafen. 2-cost spell, rogue, priest. Silence minion combo, also deal 2 damage to it. This is, obviously the new like brain freeze style card for dual class rogue. Giving rogue easy access to silence like this is interesting. I don't think this is the sort of card that is going to like just be a card that naturally sees play in tons of decks like brain freeze was, because I think the freeze effect is a bit more like universally useful than a silence effect, but it is like, something that will certainly dissuade people from playing decks that are really heavily focused on buffing individual minions. And also 2 damage less than 3. Next up we have Dance Floor. This is a paladin location. 2 cost, 2 durability. Give your minions rush. This feels like the sort of thing that's significantly stronger in like a paladin deck that's playing like big things. A lot of the sort of faster paladin decks, are like looking to just like play out their stuff and attack you with them. Don't necessarily want to rush into your guys and don't want to spend a card doing it. But if you're playing a deck that's like, hey, playing big paladin, don't necessarily have lots of uses for mana in your early turns, can afford to play out something like this, and then you play your like Kangor, boom, rush it into your guy, get my big thing in play. That actually feels a lot more appealing to me. So yeah, I think that this is a card that like is suited for the big paladin sort of strategy. We haven't really seen that have any kind of real breakout performances yet, but does seem like it is getting some love with this. Next up is Reverberations. Summon a copy of a minion. Each one dies after taking damage. So this is interesting because you can use this proactively as like, hey, I'm going to get a copy of my like big thing to somehow kill you. But obviously you're weakening your own big thing. It can also be used to copy your opponent's thing and make it more vulnerable. You can obviously ping it down as a mage. You can attack it with an imp as a warlock. I don't really know that this is necessarily something that like goes into anything that isn't just like weirdly comboing. Like maybe this is a way to just get additional copies of like Egwin as a mage. That's really the only place that it seems particularly appealing to me right now, but it's an interesting card nonetheless. Certainly the sort of thing that come up and be interesting in Discover effects. And then we have Magatha. Talked about her a couple times already. 5-cost, 5/5 neutral. Battlecry, draw 5 cards. Give any spells drawn to your opponent. So this is obviously very reminiscent of Book of Specters from back in, I don't even remember what that expansion was. But I played a lot of Book of Specters mage decks with Mountain Giant, where I was like, hey, I'm just going to draw a bunch of cards. My deck is basically all minions, and boom. You almost never get any card to draw back because, well, your deck is almost all minions. This, I think, is a very powerful card in like a menagerie style deck. Maybe you play a deck that's like basically just minions and weapons and play this and the discard a weapon to draw 3 to just give you that deck flow. Obviously right now the most popular version of Menagerie that sees really any play is in Warrior, which currently uses Roaring Applause. But like maybe you have other options for playing, just a really minion focused strategy because of this. This is, obviously extremely powerful effect, draw 5 connected to a 5-cost 5/5. And, as long as you're able to largely avoid the drawback, I think this has, a lot of potential to be a very effective card in a very minion-focused strategy. I don't think you don't necessarily play this as something like Mech Mage because your seafloor gateways are so key, but maybe you just play seafloor gateway and still play this. And obviously, giving away a Seafloor Gateway is not necessarily that terrible, right? That's one of the things. This isn't just discard the spell; it is give your opponent the spell, right? So it is much harder to play than, say, a Book of Specters in a deck that has a higher chance of missing. But overall, I think it's a very, very powerful card that I am excited to try and build around because, well, I like attacking with minions. And our last card is Horn of the Windlord. A 6-cost, 3-power, 4 durability weapon that is preventing me from being able to get focused on by my camera. Boom, there I am. Wind Fury, whenever your hero attacks a minion, set its stats to 3/3. So this is basically a Doomhammer, or very similar to a Doomhammer, that is also excellent for minion removal. If you're, in either Shaman or Paladin, both of them have reasonable access to healing, so just being able to kill 2 minions with your weapon on turn 6 can be quite powerful. And then also, it can be good burst damage, right? This is 6 damage just by itself. And if you have any kind of buffs along the lines of Rockbiter weapon, you could do very, very similar things to what you could do with Doomhammer with it. So, this in Paladin, right? You can 4 Quel'Thalas a minion and boom, nuke them with your Wind Fury, Horn of the Doomhammer, Horn of the Windlord. Basically, Horn of the Doomhammer. The Watcher of the Doomhammer. I don't know. But anyway, powerful card for both minion removal and for killing your opponent, and well, that's pretty good. But anyway, that is our last card. That is all of the cards from the new set. As I mentioned, I really do feel like the new Whirlwind Fire Warrior card really stands out to me as something that is likely one of, if not the strongest card in the set. And then the Magatha is one of the cards that really stands out to me as like, hey, this is something that really pushes people to build decks that look to be very, very different than things that, we are currently seeing. Very, very minion heavy, which again, is how I love to play the game. So excited for this. Definitely looking forward to building some new stuff and fitting some of these things into decks that already exist.